Hello, welcome to Hyperbola. A hyperbola is the set of all points xy in a plane such that the positive difference between the distances from xy to a pair of distinct fixed points called the foci is a fixed constant. In other words, we're talking about two curves from the foci. Where do you see this? Where is this commonly occurring? This occurs if a lamp, not a overhead light, but a lamp, you will see a hyperbola from where the light hits the wall above the lamp, and then you'll see a very faint second curve where the light hits the wall below the lamp. That is a naturally occurring hyperbola. Whereas another hyperbola that you commonly see in math is the curve 1 over x. That is also a hyperbola, and it occurs in the first and third quadrants. The eccentricity is the measure of how uncurvy, varying from being a circle, the hyperbola is. Eccentricity E is the square root of a squared plus b squared over a. So what we're talking about is if the eccentricity is 0, then we're talking about a circle. If the eccentricity is between 0 and 1, then we're talking about an ellipse. If the eccentricity is greater than 1, then we're talking about a hyperbola. The general form for a hyperbola is ax squared minus by squared plus dx plus ey plus f equals 0, where a and b are not equal to 0. A, b, d, e, and f are all integers. Now note, a and b do not have to be equal. Now I'm going to pause here for a minute. If I give you, notice the general form for all of the figures, all the conics that we have talked about is basically the same. If a equals b and we have a plus sign, then we have a circle. If a is not equal to b and we have a plus sign, then we have an ellipse. If we only have one squared term, then we have a parabola. If we have a and b and we have a minus sign, then we have a hyperbola. Next, the standard form. If the foci lie on a line parallel to the x-axis, the standard form of the hyperbola is x minus h squared over a squared minus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. Again, notice that if it's parallel to the x-axis, then the a squared will be under the x minus h. A squared will be bigger than b squared. Our graph will look similar to what we have below. So the hk and our major axis will be parallel to the x-axis, and our minor axis will be parallel to the y-axis, and our center will be off the x and y axis. Here it's centered at 0, 0. Our center is hk. Our major axis is y equals k. Some books call it the transverse axis. Our vertices will be h plus or minus a, comma k. Our minor axis will be x equals h, and our co-vertex will be h, comma k plus or minus b. Our asymptotes will be y equals plus or minus a over b, parentheses x minus h plus k. Now, the asymptotes do not change because our a and b will change depending on whether or not we have a hyperbola that is parallel to the x-axis or a hyperbola that is parallel to the y-axis. C squared equals a squared plus b squared. That is how you will find C for a hyperbola. The foci will be shifted from the vertex by h plus or minus c comma k. Because we're moving on the major axis, left and right, we're going to add it to the h value. If the foci lie on a line parallel to the y-axis, then the standard form of the parabola is given as y minus k squared over a squared minus x minus h squared over b squared. What this means is that the a is bigger. The a squared is bigger than the b squared. In other words, it tells us that if we're parallel to the y-axis, then our a squared is bigger. If we're parallel to the x-axis, then the number under the x squared is bigger. So if we're looking at the standard form, we can see from our graph whether we're parallel to the x-axis or y-axis. If we're looking at the equation for our standard form, if the number under the x minus h squared, we can tell whether the denominator is bigger. We can tell whether we're parallel to the x or the y, depending on which number under the denominator is bigger. If they're the same, if the numbers under the denominator are the same and we have a minus sign, then we still know we have a hyperbola. If it's a plus sign, then we need to check and make sure that we don't have a circle. Our y-axis is our major axis in this case. Our x-axis is our minor axis. Our HK is our center. Our major axis, or again, some books call it our transverse axis, is x equal to h. Because remember, the y-axis is the x equal to h axis. Our vertex, or our vertices, are h comma k plus or minus a, because a is the number that's under the x minus k squared. Our minor axis, or our conjugate axis, is y equals to k, and our covertex is h plus or minus b comma k, because our covertex are the points outside, and if you notice, they make a little rectangle. Our asymptotes again are y equals plus or minus a over b, parentheses x minus h, close parentheses, plus k. Notice the equations are the same, but where that a is now under the y and b is under the x. So the equation and the way you find it stays the same, but when you put it in the standard form, it depends on where your major axis is and where your minor axis is. C squared equals a squared plus b squared is found the same hyperbola no matter which is your major and minor axis. Your foci is h comma k plus or minus c. Sketch and discuss each equation. X squared divided by 16 minus y squared divided by 9 equals 1. We know the major axis is the x-axis because the larger number is under the x squared. Because 16 is bigger than 9, we know that the x-axis is the major axis. We also know it's the x-axis because our center is 0, 0. We know that a squared is 16, therefore a is 4. We know that b squared is 9, therefore b is 3. Our major axis is y equals 0, which is the x-axis. We know that v, for our vertex, is 0 plus or minus 4, because a is 4, which makes our vertices plus or minus 4, 0. Our minor axis is x equals 0, which is the y-axis, so our covertex, adding that to the k value, gives us 0 plus or minus 3. Our asymptotes are plus or minus a over b. Since our center is 0, 0, we have plus or minus 4/3 x. C squared equals A squared plus B squared, which tells us that C squared is 25, so C is 5, which tells us our foci is plus or minus 5. This gives us the graph with our hyperbola going through with center 0, 0, our lines plus or minus 4/3 x, our vertices plus or minus 4, and our foci plus or minus 5. Sketch and discuss the equation. 16x squared minus 9y squared equals negative 35. Divide by negative 35 to set the equation equal to 1. Upon doing this, we find that we have negative x squared divided by 9/4 plus y squared divided by 4 equals 1. Rearranging this, we have y squared divided by 4 minus x squared divided by 9/4 equals 1. This tells us that a squared equals 4, so a equals 2. B squared equals 9/4, so b equals 3/2. Our center is then 0, 0. Our major axis is x equals 0, which is the y-axis. Our vertices are plus or minus 2 because this is on the y-axis. So we're adding everything to find our vertices and our focus. We're adding them to the k variable. Our minor axis is the y equals 0 or the x-axis. So our co-vertex is plus or minus 3/2, 0. Our asymptotes are plus or minus 2 divided by 3/2 x, which equals plus or minus 4/3 x. C squared equals a squared plus b squared, which makes c squared equals to 25/4, which makes c equal to plus or minus 5/2, which makes our focus 0, plus or minus 5/2. This gives us the graph that opens upward and downward with the asymptotes going through 0, 0. Find the equation of the hyperbola described with vertices plus or minus 2, 0 and focus negative 4, 0. With the vertices plus or minus 2, 0, that tells us that a equals 2, so a squared equals 4. Our horizontal major axis is y equals 0. Our focus, c equals negative 4, so c squared equals 16. Since we know c and we know a, we can find that b using c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So we find that b squared equals 12. So b equals 2 square roots of 3. This tells us our standard form is x squared over 4 minus y squared over 12 equals 1. Multiplying through by 12, which is our LCD, we find our general form is 12 times x squared over 4 minus 12 times y squared over 12 equals 12 times 1. So we find 3x squared minus y squared equals 12. So 3x squared minus y squared minus 12 equals 0. Find the equation of the hyperbola described with asymptotes y equals plus or minus 2/3 x with vertex 6, 0. Telling us that the asymptote equals 2/3 x means that a over b reduces to 2/3 x. Telling us that the vertex equals 6 tells us that a equals 6. Since we have the y value as 0, that tells us the major axis is y equals 0. Since we have that a over b equals 2/3 and a equals 6, we can set up the proportions 2/3 equals 6 over b. So then we have that 2 times 3 equals 6. So then what do we have to multiply 3 by? We have to multiply 3 by 3, and so that tells us that b equals 9. We can then put this in standard form to get x squared over 36 minus y squared over 81 equals 1. 36 is 9 times 4. 81 is 9 times 9. In the past, I've had students say, well, y squared should be first, but you've written x squared first. Because we know that y squared is bigger, so it should be y squared over 81 minus x squared over 36. It doesn't matter. It'll come out, the negative will come out. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that we know that this is a hyperbola. Okay, it doesn't matter the negative sign. It doesn't matter whether you put x squared over 36 minus y squared over 81 or y squared over 81 minus x squared over 36. It doesn't matter. That 36 is 9 times 4, 81 is 9 times 9, which tells us our LCD, our least common denominator, is 9 times 9 times 4. We multiply by our LCD to get 9 times 9 times 4 times x squared over 36 minus 9 times 9 times 4 times y squared over 81 equals 9 times 9 times 4 times 1. So then we have 9x squared minus 4y squared equals 9 times 9 times 4. So our general form is 9x squared minus 4y squared minus 324 minus 0. Find the equation of the hyperbola described with vertices plus or minus 5, 0 and contains 9/5, -4. Telling us that we have plus or minus 5, 0 tells us that a equals 5, so a squared equals 25, and our major axis is horizontal, is y equals 0. This tells us our standard form is x squared over 25 minus y squared over b squared equals 1. Now use the point 9/5, -4 to find b. That means we put 9/5 in for x and -4 in for y, and we solve for b. So we have 9/5 squared over 25 minus -4 squared, and that's -4 quantity squared, over b squared equals 1. So that's 81 over 25 divided by 25 minus 16 over b squared minus 1. Now I drew a little dashed line to separate the PowerPoint page. That simplifies to 81 over 625 minus 16 over b squared equals 1. Our LCD is 625b squared, so we're going to multiply through by 625b squared to get rid of all of our fraction. So we have 81b squared minus 16 times 625 equals 625b squared. Moving the 81b squared to the right side of the equation, we have negative 625 times 16 equals 544b squared. Dividing both sides by 544, we have negative 625 divided by 34 equals b squared. The negative sign will be taken in the formula. So we have x squared over 25 minus y squared over b squared equals 1, where b squared equals 625 over 34. The negative sign is taken up in the formula, so we're only looking at b squared being 625 over 34. So x squared over 25 minus y squared over 625 over 34. Flipping that denominator, we have x squared over 25 minus 34y squared over 625 equals 1. Multiplying through by 625, we have 625 times x squared over 25 minus 625 times 34y squared divided by 625 equals 625 times 1, simplifies to 25x squared minus 34y squared equals 625, which reduces to 625x squared minus 34y squared minus 625 equals 0. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.